Hey, I'm here with
Hey.
Carla Hall, culinary anthropologist extraordinaire. Yeah, she is amazing. I'm gonna take you in a little bit of a different direction because I watched this thing on CBS Sunday Morning, which I love, by the way. Jane Pauley has been great filling in. They did a piece which has me still angry, so I need to vent with you right now. Okay.
Okay.
So they're talking about vanilla. They open it up and you see this rich bean, and I have in my cabinet the beans, and you split it open and you take the dark goodness out and you put it in whatever, you
Yeah.
know, whatever you're cooking.
Right.
And
Right.
they're in Madagascar, which is an island off the coast of the great continent of Africa. And they're talking
Yeah.
about this bean, this woman who is not black. And she's talking about the billions of dollars in the industry. Then they do like maybe 1 minute, Carla Hall, like maybe 1 minute where they talk about how the bean was in Mexico, how it was in Mexico, and the islands couldn't get the bean to germinate. So there was this person that was in bondage named Edmund Albius, 12 years old. He was owned by someone that was a botanist. And so he would spend his days with the flowers and what have you. And the frustration, this guy was trying to come up with a way to germinate this vanilla bean, which was in Mexico very lucrative for the colonies, right? More valuable than silver. This 12-year-old black boy, figured out how to germinate the vanilla bean by taking a thin blade of grass or a tiny whittled down stick and folding over the bean so that it would pollinate. And the person that held him in bondage was walking in his garden one day and discovered all of this vanilla and he was like, how did this happen? To this day, Carla Hall, they use Mr. Albius's method of germinating this vanilla bean in Madagascar, which has flooded this tiny island with billions of dollars, where the average black person there makes $50 a month. The average person cultivating the vanilla makes $100 a month. It is labor intensive. You have to get them off the stalk at the right time when the flower, and then you have to massage it. You have to dip it in water. It has to be touched 2,000 times to get that slick for the oils to come out. And I'm sitting there going, this is slavery again. And no one's talking, but they're talking to these white people, white facing people, these people who have no melanin, about the lucrative nature of this bean. They mention this man in a split passing. And I'm like, we're not doing this segment without Mr. Albius.
Right.
So I'm
Right.
thinking about, all of the different things. We've been having these conversations about the origins of food and how they make us feel and culturally what they mean to us. This pissed me off on some level. I'm still trying to shake it. So
As it should. I mean, because when you get vanilla, you're like, why is this so expensive? And you know what people tell you? Because it's labor intensive. But they're not paying for the labor. I mean, think about that. Because those people don't
yes.
get that much money.
Well, I thought about it, and you're telling me it's $500 million that comes in annually, and the people who are producing it for you make $100 a month, and people are living in squalor, and you're like, well, if we give them money, then they don't know what to do with it. But like, how about you could single-handedly educate everybody? You could single-handedly make sure that everybody has abundance. $500 million is a lot of money for that small space that you can't give everybody, not just a living wage, abundance. And they're making sure, and then you go into the factories, nothing but black women, and the guy that has reproduced Mr. Albius's method of folding over that to germinate,
Mm-hmm.
he has to watch over it because people are stealing it. This is when I lost my mind. People are stealing the vanilla plants because it's more valuable than silver, and the
More valuable than what they're getting.
And the prisons there are full of kids, young people who have stolen vanilla. They're incarcerated. This is crazy, right? So I just, I think about Africa, and I think about lumber and ivory and vanilla. And, every day we just go in our cabinet, sprinkle a little in cocoa, yeah, diamonds. Well, I mean, the gold and diamonds, we expect that, right? But I never factored vanilla into the equation until today. So I'm just like, this is crazy. So do you bake? I know you can bake.
I love to bake. I do.
What's your
And
favorite thing?
I like making cakes. When I think about vanilla, I think about my grandmother's 5-flavor pound cake. And it's one of those really rich cakes. It has vanilla, rum, almond, coconut, and lemon. And all of those flavors blend, and you can't really tell where one ends and the other begins. And when I was working in a restaurant, I would make this cake for dessert. And I was the sous chef, but I would make this cake, and I would make little ones when I was making the big one to serve as dessert. And I would ask people, if you can taste all the flavors and name them, I will give you a small loaf to take home. And it would be this game that I would play, and they would come in and they would guess. I'm like, no, sorry.
But you just gave it away. Now you gave away your grandmother's secret. Is there a secret ingredient that you didn't tell us about just now?
No, because the thing is, when other people have made it, it hasn't turned out. And so the reason, let me tell you, you bring up a good point, like why I share recipes. And I realized that, a lot of times recipes were stolen, and Black people could not work with a company unless they gave their recipes away. I mean, it's especially my father was telling me that he used to work at Marson Cafe, and all the Black cooks, in order to work there, you had to share your recipes, and which is an abomination. And and then back to the vanilla, these people really weren't getting paid, but yet the person who owned the restaurant was getting all the compliments and the profits and the glory. Now back to today, with television and internet, I tend to share my recipes because I know that the recipes are in the hands, right? I give people my recipes, and I go to an event and I'm like, oh, you have your own recipe. Oh no, I used yours. Like, you did? Ooh. So there's that. And when Toni Tipton Martin talks about, in the Jemima Code, how people have stolen recipes, and she goes back and way back to the early 19th century about written recipes that Black people did. But a lot of times they would call recipes receipts, because you would give these receipts, and then if you couldn't write, there would be a white woman writing down those receipts. And so it's through translation. And so it's an issue why we have lost so much of our history and the credit. And it continues over and over. And I know we're going to talk about grits, and it happens again there too.
We're going to talk about grits in the next episode, but I wanted to, kind of leapfrog over, because when I think about Albius, Mr. Albius, and I'm going to call him Mr. Albius because he spent his life in bondage. Of course, he never made any money off of $1 billion industry, even though he single-handedly is responsible for vanilla being everywhere but Mexico. It's because of him, right? Billions and billions of dollars. He ended up being sold. He was, I think he worked as a cook on one of the islands, the island of Bourbon, which I never heard of. So if you think about, this is 1848. He died at 1880 at the age of 51, maybe, because how do we know how old he was, right? Because they kept records for things, but not to the exact month and day, So he might have been in his 50s in 1880, but he died penniless. And you think about somebody who worked their entire lives for somebody, revolutionized an entire industry that today is still very, very expensive and lucrative, and his progeny has nothing to show for it. So right. I just want to make sure that if we, that there's an African proverb that you will never die as long as somebody on earth says your name. I think yes. part of the experience that the reason why I'm doing these classes, the reason why I'm talking to people who know more things than I do in these different areas, is because if we don't say the names and if we don't reclaim our history, no one is going to do it for us. So it's so important, and I'm so grateful that you're giving your time. But I just wanted to take a little minute today to talk about vanilla and Mr. Albius, Edmund Albius, who probably that wasn't even his real name, because his mother died in childbirth and he didn't know who his father was. So he was an orphan, and I think about that. And it just makes my heart sad, but I'm glad that, we're able to speak his name in 2020.
Mr. Albius.
Let me ask you, you said in the past, you were an accountant, you were a model, and then you ended up discovering food. And as you talk about working in a restaurant, and there are people right now that are looking at, different careers for obvious reasons, maybe they're, this is a good time to start to examine, why am I on this earth? To work subserviently, and you always bring joy. Even when I first watched you on Top Chef, I was like, these motherfreakers can't hold a candle to her, and she's still very humble. You're in you're cooking for people who you can outcook, and you're baking, which is not your job. Can you talk a little bit about what motivated you to make your grandmother's very special pound cake in a space that they didn't ask you to do that, and you just brought that to the table?
When you put it like that, I'm like, why would I do that? And as a chef, when you are given the opportunity to do the special, and I was young and new in the restaurant, when you're given the opportunity to do a special, like create the special, it's an honor. And you are using your creativity to put a dish on another chef's menu, because what that is saying is that chef trusts you. And that's how we hear it. The chef trusts you to put this dish on the menu, and people are coming in to get his food, and he allows you to integrate your food into a menu that he has overseen. And in the restaurant world, it was an honor, right? And so I started doing this pound cake, and I remember actually writing it down and putting it. And as you say this, it's all coming back. I remember writing it down and putting it into the book of recipes for the restaurant. And then what happens when I leave? It's still there, right? I leave, and that recipe is there. And you can look at it like, even though I was paid a small amount of money, I guess the way that the business looks at it is that we were paying you. Granted, how do you get money for a recipe? How does that work? How does that system work when you're paying somebody to work with you? Anything that's created in that space belongs to, in your head, and probably in many businesses, it belongs to the person who is employing you. When I had a company, and when people brought their own recipes, I would give them credit and name, saying Jennifer's chocolate cake, so-and-so's this. And then when they left, or if I wanted to use it, I would call them, may I use your recipe? I will give you credit. That is one way to continue the lineage, and also to give that person credit. It's almost like giving them a copyright of that recipe if you mention their name. Kind of like Mr. Albius vanilla. I mean, even if you called him the strain, like there's bourbon vanilla, there's Madagascar vanilla. What if there was Albius vanilla, right?
All of it should be Albius vanilla, because there's no Madagascar vanilla without Edmund Albius. Period.
Absolutely. Well, that's what I'm saying. They've called it by the places where they have gotten the vanilla. It's just as easy to call it by its name. All of these different roses and strains and different foods. it should be called Albius vanilla. But to your point, and even when it's about value in ourselves, isn't it? And so when I think about going back to that time when I'm just happy to have a job as a career changer and doing this thing that I love, I gave a piece of myself just because I was happy to be there and not realizing the value of that thing.
That's so powerful that you're saying that. And as you're saying it, I'm going to ask you, is there a place where your grandmother's pound cake that no one could know what was in it? They couldn't guess what was in it because it was such a blend of beautiful flavors. Is there a Carla Hall version of that in one of your cookbooks? Is
Yes.
your grandmother's recipe in one? Okay, all right.
Mm-hmm.
So we can get under your name this recipe. Which cookbook?
Yeah, I call it Granny's Pound Cake.
Granny's Pound Cake. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
with the bourbon in it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, which book is it in? Is it in the latest one?
And it's in my first Cooking with Love. Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. All right. So I'm gonna put it in the
And
description.
here's about that recipe in Cooking with Love. Somehow, some way, the butter got cut short. So I'm telling everybody it should be an additional stick of butter.
A whole stick? A whole
Yes,
stick of butter?
it's a pound cake. Yes. So in the book, it is 4 ounces. It should be 8 ounces. It's not even a pound, but it should be 8 ounces of butter.
Okay. All right. See, y'all got some inside information here you wouldn't get anywhere else. Okay. So the last thing I want to ask you, as you were new coming into the business, there's another layer that I want to just kind of, when you're new, like you said, you were happy to be there, but there's another level of humility when you're learning something, because there's some people out there right now that can cook their faces off or cook the hell out of everything. And they probably are better than the restaurants. Well, especially now. But they won't humble, like everybody wants to shoot to the top. Everyone wants to be a superstar. Everybody wants to be a top chef. Can you talk a little bit about that journey for you and why that was important to apprentice under and to sous chef and to do things that might have been deemed beneath you in terms of your culinary skill?
I think it's like an artist going to school and without a degree and without experience to work under somebody, your work is valued less. So when you buy a piece of art, in order for it to really appreciate, you go to school, you get the paper behind it. And I think that's the same way with working in a kitchen. It is about proving that you are that thing. And for me, being older and being a career changer, I just wanted to soak up as much knowledge as I could. And that continued when I was on Top Chef. So when I was on Top Chef, I considered that experience not only being there to showcase what I could glean and win and matriculate through the competition, but also to learn from those masters who were coming to judge. They had guest chefs coming to judge. And I was like a sponge. I was like, if I go home today, I want to make sure that I leave with more than I came in here with. And information is power, and it's only somebody with a lot of ego who's like, I know. But so when you're busy saying, I know, you are missing something that you could know or that you could learn. And when you're on the top and you get feedback at the judges table, and then when you're on the bottom, you got feedback from these professionals at the judges table. And I always felt like, when you're in the middle, you don't get anything. And when you were just safe, right? And when people play it safe throughout their lives, they're missing on so much, and they're just skating by. They're missing out on information, because you get it when you're at the top and you get it when you're at the bottom. And so there's a part of me that doesn't play it safe. That's a little bit of the rebel. And I had to become comfortable with being uncomfortable, because being on the bottom, it's uncomfortable because that means that you may go home. But when somebody is giving you feedback about your food, I'm like, okay, this may be the last time that I get this feedback. And I got to the point where I'm like, I'm here for it. Even though everything in my body, all of my nerve endings are so nervous that whatever I gave is going to be rejected. But on the other hand, I'm going to learn how to fix it or how to take this dish to another level.
What was the greatest lesson you learned during that experience that you, to this day, still utilize?
I think I have a good palate. I have a good palate, and to trust my instincts on food. So there was one time that I was making a groundnut stew, and even to do an African dish on this show that were mostly white people and mostly white men, I had put up to do this dish, and it was a team effort this particular time. And we were cooking for the US Open. So cooking a dish for athletes, and everybody was going around talking about the dishes that they were going to make. And I said, oh, I'm going to make a groundnut stew. And they're like, a stew? That's not fancy, a stew? And I in my heart, I knew that was the dish. I immediately knew that was the dish I wanted to make. And then when I got that response, I was like, oh my God, I really thought that it hit me so hard that I was supposed to do this dish. And now all of a sudden I'm second guessing myself, and I'm like, oh, and and that insecurity is like, oh, I really thought that was the right dish. And then I couldn't think of anything else. And so I became stubborn. I said, I'm doing it anyway. I'm doing this dish. But there was still a part of me that was like, oh, I really want to make it fancy. What can I do? So I continue to do this dish. I know, right? You're battling what somebody is telling you is fancy and all of this stuff versus what's in your heart. And who's to say that my food is supposed to be fancy? Because a lot of times fancy isn't tasty. Okay.
I'll say it. Mm-hmm.
Right? So I did this dish, and we were supposed to go up, and the team captain is deciding who goes up to do their dish. And they blow through all these people, and our team is only 1 point ahead, and he looks around, and it's just between me and him to go up. They're like, okay, Carla, right? Because if I had lost, they had another chance, right? So I go up to do this dish, and I'm going up against another guy, and he overcooked his salmon. And it goes through all of the judges, and the first judge says, oh, I like Trey's dish. And I'm just like, oh, and it hits you. It's like, oh. And then the next judge is like, I like all of the textures and flavors of Carla's. I'm going with Carla's dish. And then the next judge picks my dish. And then there are a couple more judges, and somebody goes with Trey, and the next judge says, Carla, your dish is really spicy. And I'm just like, but I like spicy. I'm going with Carla's dish. And I won. And it's just, Karen, it was like, and I can still feel it right now. It was confirmation. It was, following my heart, and they picked my dish, and I was like, yes. And I went and I did the, because that was like that African dish that I did, right? And I was just like, in your face, fancy, forget you. And it was about, not only was it about doing that dish, but it was about on television doing a dish that was a part of my culture and doing that African groundnut stew. And so it was so many different things that was confirmation for me. And as I walked away, I heard somebody say, good thing Trey overcooked his salmon. And it was like, and even now I can feel the emotion of that. So this journey was a high, low, right? Because then I'm sucker punched again. And then we went to the judges table, and it was all of the winners from my team up there. And I'm just standing there like, I'm happy to be here, skating in. And and everybody else was like all proud and kind of arrogant, and I'm sorry for this long story, but and then my dish was picked again as the overall winner. My dish won. And for me, it taught me to live in my truth, to not underestimate my intuition, but also I am enough.
Yes, you are.
Right? I am
Yes.
enough. And so often we discount what we bring to the table. So when you asked me, oh my, it's so emotional. So when you asked me about my grandmother's cake and things that we give away freely because we don't have the confidence or we don't have the value instilled in us, and we give those things away freely, the things that we do so easily, and we haven't valued them because we think that hard work justifies value. And when we give ourselves and our gifts away, and we have to learn to honor them and to hold them close and to know that those were the gifts that we were given to share, right? And to make our millions, and or not even millions, but to value them when we give them, to give them, not even to give them away, to use them in this lifetime to get ahead. And that was one of the biggest lessons that I learned.
Mm. Speaking of that, you have a podcast that's coming out soon.
Yeah, it's coming out in September
Okay.
15th, and it's Say Yes with Carla Hall. And it's about this thing, and my mantra is say yes, adventure follows, then growth. And sometimes saying yes is the hardest thing, and we go through all of these challenges, which is the adventure. And if we become comfortable with being uncomfortable in that space, we will grow, right? And so I try to dig into people's lives to see when that happened, and when they were uncomfortable, and how they pushed through and persevered, and how they found that gift and honored it and allowed it to propel them.
I'm looking forward to that. So I'm gonna keep putting. I'll put that in the description too, so people can click on. And I want to thank you for sharing all of that. What's in the ground nut stew, and is that recipe in one of your cookbooks?
Yes, the recipe is in Cooking with Love. And it is a base of onions and garlic and tomatoes and peppers. And then I stir in peanuts, like peanut butter. And then it has stock in it. It's ginger and tomatoes and all of these things that you think wouldn't go together, but are definitely West African. And then I put roasted peppers and azuki beans, or small black beans. And it is just this beautiful soup that makes you feel like you're traveling. And then the garnishes, sometimes sweet potatoes are in it. It's like all of the bounty from West Africa that you can think of are in this stew. And I serve it sometimes with little pieces of hot water cornbread, because that's the closest thing to what we have to fufu, which is what might be eaten with it in West Africa. And here we have hot water cornbread. And I make a lime salt. So I take lime and the zest of lime, and I crush it with my fingers to kosher salt. And then I sprinkle the cornbread with that. And I serve it with peanuts and wedges of lime. And it is really delicious. And sometimes I might fry pieces of sweet potatoes to garnish it.
Okay, just need to get that out of the way. And I just, again, this was not what we were going to talk about, but I wanted to, and in doing so, I feel like I honored your grandmother. I definitely honored you in your journey. And I know that there are people out there that are on their own journey. Maybe it's not a culinary one, but we're not really talking about food, as you can see. There's something more. And you're going to continue the conversation on your podcast, which is, again, not about food, which, you know, what we do, I always tell people, you're a writer, you're this, you're that, doesn't define who you are. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of us lean into our titles in life. I'm a lawyer and I'm a doctor. So when you lose that, who are you? You know,
Right, right.
Toni Morrison, she has this whole thing about, race. If I take away your color, what are you? Are you any good? And I want to relate that to everything. There are people who, because they have certain degrees and they have certain initials after their name, that they value themselves in that, but not in here.
Right.
And you lose all of that. Who are you? And I think that that's got to be the question that we start to ask ourselves. And
Yeah. So
that's
if I asked you, who are you?
oh, I am. I was put on earth to agitate people into goodness. Irritating. I recognize my personality comes on very strong. I'm not ever going to tamp it down to make anybody else feel good or comfortable. And in that strength, there's value because there's going to be a percentage of people who need that. I'm not for everybody, and you can't be for everybody. So be who you're here for, who the people who will hear your voice and will follow the things that you're saying and be, benefited, they'll benefit from it. Those are
Mhm.
the people that you came onto this earth for. And because I do believe we're all here to serve. So that's my gift, is to learn and teach and do
When
it.
I Yeah, when I hear you say that and being an agitator, and the thing that I have learned, if somebody says something to you, so when you say something to people and it goes inside, it makes them mad, because either you're going to be indifferent or there's something that touches you. And when it touches you and it makes you emotional, there's something that you have to hear in that thing. And it can be hard to hear, but to be comfortable with being uncomfortable with that feeling and really ask yourself, why are you agitated by this thing? And that's the thing that I think people don't want to do, which is why the growth is so slow. But if you can honestly just say to yourself, thank you, Miss Karen Hunter, for agitating me and in a way that helps me grow. And you don't have to be all up in somebody's face to do it. And you just go to your corner and grow. That agitation is going to do more for them than some yes person.
And let me tell you, I've always kind of had this personality. And as a kid, the kids didn't want to play with me.
Mm.
So, you have a neighborhood, well, and I'm overstating it. When we got to the teenage years, my group of friends went off and they were playing tennis. And because I couldn't play tennis as well, they didn't want to play with me. And I was like, I found myself alone. So I read a lot of books. And then when I got to high school, I became very popular. But then I didn't need the popularity anymore. So, it's like you either going to embrace the things about you. And I realized, I'm somebody that's going to, oh, why are you doing that? That's bad for you. Why are you, I'm that person, right? Who wants to be around
Right,
that person?
right,
So it's like, well, okay, maybe I'll soften it, maybe I'll change, and but it wasn't who I'm that person. I'm going to
right,
point it out. Yes, you have spinach in your teeth. If you ask me if something looks nice, I'm going to tell you yes or no. So you may not want to hear that. So I know I'm not that go-to person for some people who want to always constantly hear what makes them feel good. But once you realize this is who I am, this is how God made me, I'm here for a reason. Let me run, embrace it. Everything fell in line. So I found my tribe. And you don't need a whole lot of people in your life to be happy. You don't have to surround yourself with a whole lot of
yeah,
people. You just need one or two confidants that you can, bare your soul to, and who will have you no matter how effed up you are. Because that's the other thing, embracing your effed upness is something that many of us won't do. Uh, but that's what makes you rounded. So, that's it. All right, enough of me. This is about you. All right, Carla Hall. When I come onto your podcast, then you can ask me. Oh, I'm expecting an invitation too. I'm expecting an invitation. All right. So,
absolutely, absolutely.
all right. So we learned today Granny's pound cake, which has some vanilla in it, that I'm sure Mr. Albius had something to do. So if anybody's cooking with any kind of vanilla, thank Mr. Edmund Albius. We're going to say his name again. Edmund Albius died penniless, but he will not live in the annals of history without us saying his name. and Carla Hall, cooking with you. I appreciate that. So we're going to put your cookbook, Cooking with Love, in there. Of course, your latest cookbook, which is what, Cooking with Soul? Is it Carla Hall Soul Food?
Carla
That's
Hall
right.
Soul Food. And let me just say one more thing about the pound cake. So this was a method that I saw in a really old cookbook. When I make my grandmother's pound cake, I put it into an oven, a cold oven, and turn the oven on to 300 degrees. And by doing that slow bake, the butter, the crumb becomes like this really dense, and it doesn't cook too quickly. So try it for a
No,
pound.
when you said it, I was like, cold oven, blasphemy.
I know, I know, I know, I know, and it works. It works.
Okay.
I know.
Now you.
It was just something that I wish I could remember what cookbook, but it was some old cookbook. And I didn't use the recipe. I just used the method, and I was like, I'm going to try that. And it cooks so slowly, and the way that the butter melts and comes into the flour, and then it gets that nice crunchy top.
Oh my God. You
It
just.
takes about 90 minutes, but it really was great. Okay, now if your cake messes up, I'm sorry.
No, I'm gonna share this with my mother, who just last week, because my grandmother Julia, her mom, could cook her face off. I
Mhm.
mean, just. And so she said, because she and her husband have a garden, and they have, so they had the sour cream. So she made my grandmother sour cream pound cake, and she's like, I was like, can you just freeze some and send it to me? Not that I need it, because I got to lose this COVID-19 pounds. But she was like, it turned out so well. And I remembered my grandmother's pound cake, because my mother could never cook as well as my grandmother. So my grandmother not being here, that was like, wow, that piece. And you just brought the pound cake now with your grandmother's pound cake, which we probably won't be able to duplicate it either. But now we got a new method. I'm going to share that with my mom. So thank you for that too. All right, Carla Hall, follow her at Carla Hall on Twitter. And I appreciate you being here today and indulging me in our vanilla exploration and Mr. Edmund Albius. We're going to talk about grits in the next episode. So stay here, subscribe, give us the thumbs up. And if you're so evil that you want to give a thumbs down because you're a hater, bad things are going to happen to you. That's bad karma. All right, just had to put that out there. So who gives the
Just go
thumbs
to a
down?
corner and grow. Go to a corner and grow.
Yes, thank you. All right, call it. Thank you.